Hello and happy Easter to you, and thank you for tuning into the St. Nicholas and Holy Family Parish page. Since we are celebrating the Octave of Easter now, and it just so happens that today's Gospel reading on this Wednesday of the Octave of Easter is a Gospel story that I'm very fond of from the Gospel of Luke, I thought I'd take a few minutes today to share with you a little reflection on that reading and some of the things that I was thinking about today when I was looking at this reading this morning. So in this reading, this is the account that's probably familiar to us. It's the account of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection. So they're on their way walking to Emmaus from Jerusalem, and Jesus draws near to them, but they don't recognize him. And Jesus continues to walk with them, and he breaks open the scriptures for them. Eventually they reach Emmaus, and they sit down to eat, and Jesus breaks the bread. And it's in the breaking of the bread that these two disciples, Cleopas and his companion, finally recognize Jesus. And then they run back to Jerusalem to meet the other apostles and share with them what happened. And they themselves hear the news from the apostles that Jesus has risen from the dead and has appeared to them. So the one thing that I think is really interesting about this gospel passage and what really drives the whole thing is the fact that when Jesus draws near to Cleopas and his companion, they don't recognize him, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because if they're disciples of Jesus, that means that they have spent a lot of time with Jesus, certainly enough time to recognize him when he appears to them after he rises from the dead. But I'll read this part in the gospel where it says this. This is in Luke chapter 24. And it says in the gospel, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. Now, I think that the way that is worded, their eyes were prevented from recognizing him, is very telling, because there are two ways that you can be prevented from recognizing something or someone as they really are. It could be something in yourself, like your own fear or prejudice or anger, but it could also be that person themselves who prevent you from recognizing who they are. Maybe they put on a disguise or a costume or something of the sort. So it seems to me that it's actually Jesus who is purposely preventing the disciples from recognizing him at first, because Jesus is up to something here. What Jesus wants to do is he wants to increase the disciples' faith in him and in who he is. And it would be better for the disciples to have that done for them in the way that Jesus explains the scriptures to them, as he does on the road, and eventually in the breaking of the bread when they recognize him. It's better for the disciples' faith, and they come to have a stronger faith in Jesus and in the resurrected Lord than they would have if, at the moment when Jesus appeared to them on the road, they recognized him right away. Now, when I was also reading this, I almost had to laugh a little bit, because the first things that they say to each other when Jesus draws near to them is, Jesus says, more or less, "So what's been going on, guys?" And Cleopas turns to him and he said, "Are you seriously the only person around here who doesn't know what's been going on?" He's referring to the events of the Passion and the Crucifixion. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, it's almost like if Jesus showed up today as a stranger, we didn't recognize him, and he says, "So what's going on, guys?" And we would say, "Are you seriously the only person who doesn't understand what's going on? We've had this whole coronavirus pandemic going on, and this is all anybody has been talking about." Which kind of got me thinking about some of the parallels between our situation today in living through this pandemic and what the disciples experienced on the road there with Jesus to Emmaus. Because the disciples felt deprived of Jesus. And even when Jesus was with them, he was with them in a hidden sort of way. They weren't able to recognize his presence like they normally would. But when they did eventually recognize his presence later on, at the end of the day, on their journey to Emmaus, that meant more to them, and their experience of coming to understand what Jesus was doing for them was deeper, because at first they weren't able to tell what he was doing. And in our day, right now, even though we're celebrating Easter and we're certainly full of the joy of the risen Lord, the fact remains that Lent is over, but the Lent of this pandemic is not over. It kind of felt like now that Lent was over and Easter was here, the whole pandemic should be over. But we still have to keep our social distance from each other. We're still not able to attend Mass like we always do. So in a way, it still feels like we are either separated from Jesus or Jesus is still very hidden from us, kind of like he was for the disciples here. But Jesus knows what he is about. And just as the disciples were prevented from recognizing what he was doing for them throughout their journey on the road to Emmaus, and it was at the end of their journey that when they were able to recognize who he was, their faith was deepened, and they had a much better understanding of what Jesus had been doing for them, and their faith and their love for him was increased. I think in the same sort of way, as we go through this pandemic, Jesus is hidden from us, and we may not be able to recognize him in the ways that he's working right now. But God willing, when this is all over and we're able to join all together again as a community of faith at the Mass, maybe we'll be able to better recognize the ways that Jesus, in a hidden way, has been working through all this. He is still present with us here, even if we're not able to go to Mass. He's still there and he's still working, even if we don't recognize it. But maybe someday we will, and hopefully that someday will be sooner than later. So we should certainly all keep praying for that. So maybe our prayer this day could be one of continued trust in the Lord, and that even though we may not be able to see him as we usually do, we can tell our Lord Jesus that we still trust in him, and that we still recognize, we still trust the way, rather, that he's working with us in a hidden way, because we've already seen him do it before, as he is doing in this reading. So we can have full confidence that he continues to do the same thing for us today. So once again, a very happy Easter Octave to you all. I hope that you are able to celebrate with joy this Easter time, even though the social distancing continues. And know that you continue to be in my prayers each and every day. God bless you. Take care and stay well.